All right, we'll get started. Good evening, everyone. Feel free to put in the chat where you're joining from today. I know there might be a few folks from across the country, but I just want to give a little bit of an introduction. If you haven't heard of Nuns Against Gun Violence, who is uh, responsible for creating this webinar and for sponsoring it. Nuns Against Gun Violence is a coalition of Catholic sisters and their allies from across the country that affirms the value of human life through through prayer, education, advocacy for common sense, evidence-based gun violence prevention. As many of us are active in many other justice issues as well, we are also increasing awareness of how gun violence intersects with a number of other issues, including immigration, arms trafficking, civil rights, racial justice, and more. Sharon, I see that your hand's raised. Did you have a question or? No. Um, One thing that we do offer through Nuns Against Gun Violence is that we pray at the first Thursday meeting each month at 1 p.m. Eastern for victims of gun violence from the past month. We believe at Nuns Against Gun Violence that it is easy to get inundated with facts and numbers while working for an end to gun violence, like how, firearms are the leading cause of death for children and teens, or how many people died in a mass shooting. But as women, religious, and their partners from across the country, what we can bring to the gun violence prevention movement is our faith practice and our belief in the dignity of every person. Because of this teaching, it is important to remember that every person's life is precious and that we need to remember the lives of those we have lost due to the evil of gun violence by name. So this is open to everyone, and I'll mention at the end as well that all are welcome to join for that. Given how our focus on prayer is so important to this movement to end gun violence, I'll turn it over to Sister Gemma Dahl, a Dominican Sister of Peace from Columbus, Ohio, to lead us in an opening prayer.
Thank you, Mackenzie. And as we begin so many of our gatherings, we really are mindful of those who have lost their lives, their precious lives, too early because of gun violence. And each one has a name, each one is loved, each one leaves mourning and grief and anger behind in their loss. And so we are gathered here tonight to really ask God to build hope in us as we work to prevent any more of this senseless loss. And so we gather together with a hunger for hope. What is done cannot be undone. What is done next must now be done with care. We gather because we are hopeful, because we have visions and dreams of a brighter future. We pray that there may be more than vision in this room, for these are the wounds that we must heal together: grief and anger for all that has been lost, guilt and fear in the reliving, pain that has gone on without sufficient comfort, mistrust that was earned and that continues burning still. Every death we name and yet still carry. We pray for those we can't speak aloud. We pray for those who will die today. These are the losses that seek replacement, not cancellation or denial. Losses we tend cautiously, applying the salve of compassion, observing the scars that mark our history and shapes the future that we share. This is not a time for quick solutions, fancy talking. This is a time to pray for peace, for hope. God, help us in this endeavor. Help us to listen, to hear. Help us to take enough time to honestly receive one another's stories. What is done cannot be undone. What is done next must now be done with care. We gather because we are hopeful, because we have visions and dreams of a brighter future. May the grace of this time together help us to walk forward. May the wisdom of this experience help us to know our path. May we have the courage to recommit as often as necessary until our way is clear. May we have the perseverance together to see it through. May you, O God, cause it to be so. We pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Gemma, for that prayer. Um, that is so very important to remember and to think. And we're gathering here tonight because we want to talk about the hope that is happening in Ohio. Despite the manifold amount of challenges we are facing as a state. Um, and the key, I think, to that and what we'll hear tonight is collaboration and how we are working together to build those connections that so that what can happen is a better future for all of us. Um, so one organization I kind of wanted to mention before we get started, because quite a few of us are on there, are part of this organization as well, and they are a co-sponsor. But first, to give you a kind of a framework of this webinar, given the realities of federal legislation, this year, Nuns Against Gun Violence really wanted to focus on different groups active at the state level who are doing what they are doing in regards to gun violence prevention. Last month, we focused our first webinar on Pennsylvania, and now we're going to be hearing from some speakers across Ohio who are active in the effort for gun violence prevention in our state. I am the justice promoter for the Sisters of Charity of Cincinnati, and am active in both Nuns Against Gun Violence and our other group, which is the Ohio Sisters Justice Network. Sister Gemma and another one of our speakers, Jen Moore Williamson, are a part of that group as well. I just wanted to mention them as a beginning example of hope and how we collaborate across our state. Then I'll kind of move into some of the challenges into gun violence prevention efforts in Ohio and introduce our speakers. So, Ohio Sisters Justice Network is a coalition of Ohio-based women religious and their partners who collaborate together across our religious congregations for gospel justice. We focus on many issues, including democracy, ending the death penalty, human trafficking, immigration, integral ecology and climate justice, peace and nonviolence, and racial justice. For us, gun violence kind of intersects with a couple of those issues, and we are, like we already mentioned, also on part of Nuns Against Gun Violence and work with them. So one example of how we have collaborated on gun violence in the past as a group is we did a gun violence prevention billboard campaign. It was an idea that came from actually another gun violence or a community-based organization in Youngstown, Ohio, that one of my sisters came into my office and shared this idea and asked if we could replicate it, and had spoken with that community-based organization, and he had said go with it. And so I shared that with my leadership team at Sisters of Charity, and they kind of shared it out with their leadership groups who are across Ohio and Kentucky. And then from there, I shared it with Ohio Sisters Justice Network and a bunch of other congregations across our state. Ended up putting a billboard on interstates in Cincinnati, Dayton, Columbus, and Cleveland. And the billboards all said, put the guns down, let peace begin with me. So that was just one thing we did last year in the spring to summer of June, April to June 2024. And, also we've kind of been taking, as a part of Nuns Against Gun Violence, taking part in their Lenten fasting campaigns that they have done the last two Lenten seasons. And their advocacy piece to that Lenten fast has been focused on federal legislation. So last spring in 2024, I drafted some letters that we could use for uh, legislation in Ohio, and included some of the bills that were being talked about in the last Ohio General Assembly. And we sent that out through Ohio Sisters Justice Network. So just I wanted to give that as another example of how we at Ohio Sisters Justice Network and through Nuns Against Gun Violence are collaborating both nationally and locally and across the state. Um, Also in those letters, I kind of wanted to lean into those letters included some numbers about that show that Ohioans really want common sense gun legislation. For instance, in both 2013 and 2019, polls consistently show that 90% of Ohioans and 86 to 87% of gun owners support universal black background checks in Ohio. Additionally, more than 60% of Ohio voters oppose the change in Ohio law that currently allows Ohioans to carry a concealed loaded gun in public places without a license. And 74% of Ohio voters support an extreme risk law that would allow family members and or law enforcement to petition a court to temporarily remove guns from individuals who are at risk of harming themselves or others. So those are some things that like give us hope in a state that tends to be thought of as in like more of a gun rights or supporting gun rights context, but there is a lot of movement for safe legislation amongst the general populace. However, because of gerrymandering, Republicans hold a supermajority in both the Senate and House at the Ohio State House. And I'm sure one of our speakers will speak more directly on that as well. Despite, Ohio typically voting around 55% Republican, 45% Democrat, Republicans have a supermajority in both houses. And because our district maps are redrawn, by elected officials, currently five Republicans and two Democrats, maps that often are deemed unconstitutional. They are drawn in a way that guarantees victory for candidates in most districts. So that means elections aren't competitive, and the most competitive elections are the primary, where it pays to be more extreme or more to the extremes of what your party believes. Thus, the legislation we are seeing and have been seeing over decades is more extreme than what the Ohio voters in the Pulse poll have consistently wanted. Um, and then the last context I'll frame for you in Ohio is that state law currently prohibits gun laws stricter than state laws. And unfortunately, Cincinnati and other areas, and I know Councilmember Anna Elby is on this call too, have lost cases trying to circumvent this legislation as it kind of has been broadly applied to the courts. And I know Cincinnati is currently trying to focus its gun prevention efforts at getting firearms out of the hands of children, but have largely been handicapped by state law when it comes to uh, making any progress for adults. So those are kind of some of the challenges, and they they're pretty hard. They're pretty tough challenges to hear. And I know, I know Ohio is not unique in that regard. In a lot of states across our country, for wherever you're joining from, might be having a very similar context to to the one we are also dealing with here. Before I get too far into the weeds with that, I want to kind of introduce our speakers. And I'm sure our speakers will add to the context I shared. But I think you'll be inspired by them because all of our speakers are not giving up despite this reality and who are actively working to make our community safer. So without further ado, I'll introduce our panelists. So our first panelist is Senator Willis Blackshear Jr. Um, Senator Willis E. Blackshear is currently serving on his first term as state senator for Senate District 6. Prior to becoming a state senator, he served 2 terms as the state representative for District 39 and then 38. Through his work in the General Assembly, Senator Blackshear hopes to help the business communities district both bolster the workforce and prioritize families while advocating for the mental health needs of Ohioans. He has also been a sponsor for gun violence prevention as a representative. So thank you, Senator Blackshear, for joining us.
Thank you so much. Thank
And
you for having me.
yeah, great to hear. Our next panelist, sorry, is the Reverend Dr. Jack Sullivan Jr. He is the executive director of the Ohio Council of Churches, which brings together 17 denominations as a Jesus Christ movement for unity, justice, and peace. He is ordained in the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ, and is a council member of several organizations, including Trinity Lutheran Seminary and Catholic Mobilizing Network. So thank you, Jack, for joining us.
My pleasure.
And then we have our next speaker is Mr. Dion Green, who is the founder and CEO of Flourishing Under Distress, Given Encouragement, FUDGE, is the 501c3 nonprofit that helps survivors through their traumatic experiences with resources and support. Mr. Green is a prominent advocate against gun violence and actively engaging in communities across the nation that have been profoundly affected by this pressing issue. So thank you, Dion, for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
And then our last speaker is Ms. Jen Morin Williamson. She is the the Sisters of the Precious Blood, Peace, Justice, and Ecology Coordinator in Dayton, Ohio. She also serves on the steering committee for Nuns Against Gun Violence, and I work with her quite a lot. So hi, Jen.
Hi, Mackenzie. Thanks for being here.
So now I will invite all of our speakers to kind of be highlighted here. And I'll turn it over to them to introduce themselves a little bit further. They'll share a little bit more about what brought them into this work. Senator Blackshear, do you want to start?
Sure. Yes. Good evening, everybody. Willis Blackshear Jr., State Senator for District 6, currently in my first term in the Senate. Like it was said in my bio, prior to being in the Senate, I was in the House for 2 terms. Really appreciate the opportunity to be on this panel. This is a very important topic. Work I've been doing for the last couple of years. And you're going to hear more about it as the panel goes on. But, I've lost multiple people in my family to gun violence. And I can recall a situation where my cousin lost his life to somebody who shouldn't have even had a gun. That person shouldn't have even had a gun. And that was something that could have easily been prevented. But as a legislator, my main priority is to protect our communities. That's been the main thing, having common sense gun legislation that I believe is common sense to make sure that we are keeping our community safe and making sure that we are keeping guns out of the hands of those who shouldn't be nowhere near a gun. And that's been one of my driving forces. What we're seeing today is not normal. It's not normal. When we turn on the news, when we get on social media, lives are being lost every day. This is not normal. Something needs to be done because there is no reason why we have families bearing loved ones to gun violence, senseless gun violence. So just honored to be here and ready to dive into this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Reverend Dr. Jack Sullivan.
Thank you for inviting me to the forum. Um, I'm in this discussion for several reasons. First, my personal story. When I was 12 years old, my mother was shot by an estranged husband, and she survived that assault on her life, and we were very thankful for that. Yet 26 years later, my baby sister, Jennifer, in her home in Cleveland, Ohio, which is also my hometown, she was shot to death by a person whose name I think we still don't know, at a time when her then 2-year-old daughter was in the house. Then just 2 years ago, a cousin that I never had the pleasure of meeting in Lexington, Kentucky, was shot to death during a dispute with another young man. Those stories, plus one from my professional background, having served congregations where people in the membership were shot to death, including a 17-year-old young man that I had just baptized 2 years before. So these stories combine to give me energy and fuel to be in this discussion, to be in this movement for the prevention of gun violence. And then there's a theological reason. I'm a Christian minister, and I've done several funerals and been in many around the country where a person is dead and someone from the pulpit says it was God's will that the person died. When it comes to gun violence, I don't believe it's God's will that any should have perished at the hands of another person through a preventable act of gun violence. I think God intends for us to flourish. In fact, Jesus says, the thief comes to kill and destroy and to steal, but he came to give life and life abundantly, flourishing life for everyone. And I'm committed to the establishment or the promotion, if you will, of abundant life, flourishing life for everybody. And that comes in several ways, including through the prevention of gun violence in our society. So I'm excited to be here tonight to share ideas, to share faith with all of you in the quest toward a future with less and less gun violence and more peacemaking and nonviolence. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jack, for sharing that. Thank you so much for being here. And Dion, would you like to share with us?
Yes, before I even move forward, Jack, Dr. Reverend, I just have to say the flourishing part. My nonprofit is called the Fudge Foundation. That's my father's last name, but the real name of my foundation is called Flourishing Under Distress, Giving Encouragement.
Mm-hmm.
So you speaking of that, you know, it lines up together.
Mm-hmm.
But back to the topic, gun violence. Well, I've been growing up in gun violence all my life. I've been losing friends since I've been in middle school and on up and up till last year, this year. In 2019, there was a mass shooting that happened here in Dayton, Ohio that claimed 9 individuals' lives. And one of those lives just happened to be my father, Derek Fudge, who was shot and killed beside me. Ever since then, I created that nonprofit, but what created my nonprofit was Senate bill that we got passed in the state of Ohio due to VOCA, where survivors and victims were being denied access to get the help to move forward. So not am I seeing, I was seeing other individuals that was being denied. So that's what created my nonprofit. And you know, last year I lost my other uncle, my father's older brother, got shot and killed in his apartment by his neighbor. So and I mean, it's like Senator Blackshear said, it's we're just seeing gun violence. I've been this last week, I didn't held rallies, marches in other cities, and some of my kids and my camps then got killed. So I'm fighting to the ground, fighting boots to the ground, and just praying over them, you know. And that's all we continue to keep doing. At the end of the day, it still starts with choices. People have to put themselves in the right environment to be able to give this, to be able to see to give yourself an opportunity to see the future. We all make mistakes, but you know, and we'll get like Senator Blackshear said, we'll get more into it. But I got into this fight, and I'm here. I didn't die that night. He shot my father 5 times beside me, and not one of those bullets. I know that everybody don't know their purpose, but I know mine, and mine is to impact any and everybody that I can help that comes in contact with me.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dion. Thank you for that powerful testimony, all of you. Jen, would you like to share with us why you're here?
Thanks for having me. I just had the message that said my internet connection is unstable. So if I blank out, it's nothing personal. I because mostly because I work with the Sisters of the Precious Blood. I'm their Peace, Justice, and Ecology coordinator. I've been with them for about 3 years. It is such a privilege to work with the religious women, vowed women in congregations, because they've been working on issues like gun violence for decades. And so I am pleased to be able to carry that on. I look at my position as one to animate, amplify, and encourage around the issue of gun violence prevention. And so I've taken that on. It is part of my job. As Mackenzie was saying, we also focus on repealing the death penalty in the state of Ohio, immigration, racial justice, ecological justice, human trafficking. There's a lot of things that we focus on, but this is dear to my heart. And part of it is because the Nuns Against Gun Violence group has come together and really we support each other, especially in this. It's hard to work towards common sense gun laws. We can do the on the ground stuff, but I know having worked with Dion here that he's great about doing on the ground stuff. Maybe ours is to support legislation. So we're trying to figure out what is ours to do in this time. So that's what brought me to this work. And having another organization, as Mackenzie said, the Ohio Sisters Justice Network, that tries to work together, that we can come together, multiple congregations, and to put our voices together. And the more voices we have and the more action we take, the more chance we have of moving the needle. We know we're not going to make vast changes, but if we can move the needle, if we can just get some things moved along and a little safer, that's what we'd like to do. One of the things I said, and Mackenzie talked about too, is that we have these different justice issues that the different congregations focus on, and they're all fairly similar. But we also understand there's an intersectionality with them. And we look at where gun violence happens in the city of Dayton. It's underserved communities. It's communities of color. It's communities where they don't have good schools. It's communities where people can't get jobs. It's communities where the parents are working multiple jobs and kids are left with no place to go after school. So we know there's this intersection of all these different issues. So gun violence isn't just about taking guns out, but it's also providing resources and serving underserved communities. That's all I'll say right now.
Ian, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I just want to follow up on Jan. What you're saying, boots on the ground. So I do stay in the communities, but I do a lot of legislation as well too. I just had to clarify that.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Dion.
No.
Yes, you do. You do it all. We can't wait to hear more. So I guess kind of that leads us really nicely into our next question, which is what are some of the things you are currently working on or have worked on to address gun violence in your area or in your job or in your life? Senator Blackshear, would you like to start us off and go for it?
First again, there we go. Okay, so I love it. So, wow. Let me just take it back. I remember the Oregon district shooting. Getting text messages. I vividly remember where I was at. I was at my aunt's house. And the thing about that night was that you always see things on the internet, you always see things on TV, and you sometimes think this will never happen in my community. It will never happen in my community. Well, that actually happened in our community. And I remember a couple of days later, we had elected officials from all over, and there was a chant that was said, "Do something, do something, do something. And since then, the complete opposite of common sense gun legislation reform has been happening. And for me, like I said, there's no reason why, uh, as a state, we're not doing everything we can to protect our communities. So I actually met a couple of you all, I believe it was 2 years ago, for a gun violence prevention summit. That was, I may have messed up the name, but that was the gist of it. Representative Jessica Miranda, she was one of the co-chairs of it, and I was actually one of the people that was on the panel. So since then, since being in office, I've always advocated for things such as red flag laws, universal background checks, lock boxes, trigger locks. I actually got a piece of legislation right now that actually gives a tax credit for handgun training and firearm storage. We're essentially giving people money to do something they should already be doing. But then also, too, mental health. I'm a huge mental health advocate. Uh, I believe that the times in which we are living in is not normal. And I'm not talking about what you see on the news, what you see on social media. It's all about the overexposure to different things. So just working on legislation around that. This has been, at times, it feels like an uphill battle. But I think about those who have lost their lives to gun violence. And then I think about, you know, making sure we're creating a state where we don't have to continue to hear these stories over and over and over again. And like I said, this is not normal. This is not normal. What society has made normal is not normal. So for me, it's just continuing to have the conversation, continuing to introduce legislation, and continuing to bring different stakeholders together to figure out from an advocacy perspective, how can we make change? Is it something we may have to put on the ballot? Legislation, of course. Is it something we can do on a local level? Things of that nature. Those are some of the things that I've been working on.
You, Senator. Jack, do you got, what are you working on? I know you're working on a lot, so we're.
Yes. Well, let me tell you about the Ohio Council of Churches. We bring together 17 denominations as a Jesus Christ movement for unity, justice, and peace. And part of that identity means we speak to the public about certain issues that concern human life, the dignity of human life, and the flourishing of life. And our denominational leaders who make up our governing board, they are denominational bishops and executives. They very often have spoken with one voice to issues that affect life in Ohio. 4 years ago, we were asked by the then Ohio Coalition Against Gun Violence to take on the work of gun violence prevention because that group was sunsetting. And so after careful deliberation and prayer, we assumed the gun violence prevention ministry and entered that space as an organization. And we have spoken several times on legislation concerning gun violence prevention. We have spoken out against the sale of assault rifles. We did not support the measure calling for teachers to be armed in the classroom. We do not support measures that make it legal to not disclose a weapon that is concealed, or even when confronted or approached by law enforcement. We filed an amicus brief last year in support of the city of Columbus and its gun laws that were struck down by a judge at the request of the Attorney General. The Supreme Court is now considering those Columbus gun laws, and our brief is in solidarity with the city of Columbus that blocks the law that blocks assault rifles and makes it mandatory for people who have guns in their homes when children are around to lock those guns and safely store those guns. And we support that legislation. And those are among the things that we have done in terms of the legislative space. In terms of the moral space, we have come to the belief that part of our work is to join efforts in the creation of a culture of nonviolence and peacemaking. To that end, we put together a program called PLAN, Pastors and Laity Advancing Nonviolence. And through PLAN, we will be equipping clergy and laity with resources, skills, strategies through which they can model and teach nonviolence and peacemaking and de-escalation in their congregational settings and in their larger settings in their communities. And we have partnered with Tom Carlisi and Associates, a well-known group that does nonviolent speech training and communication. We've already launched the training in the Linden area online, by the way, attracting members of the Linden community to come together for training in nonviolent communication and peacemaking. And we are going to expand this ministry throughout Columbus and throughout Ohio over the course of the next few months and years. That's our contribution to the creation of a culture of peacemaking and nonviolence. We don't believe it's God's will that humans perish through gun violence. And so these deaths are preventable, and we want to be a part of the movement again toward the reduction, prevention of gun violence. And we know that this is bigger than a Christian issue, but it certainly is a Christian issue. And, you know, there's a song that we sing in the Black church, "Do you have good religion?" And the response goes, "Certainly, Lord, certainly, Lord." Well, there's some bad religion around us that glorifies power, violence, greed, and so many other things that are anti-human dignity and worth. So we like to believe that we're on the side of good religion. We're promoting peacemaking, promoting justice, promoting hope, all of these rooted and grounded in the love of God made known through Jesus Christ, available not just to Christians, but to everybody under the umbrella of human flourishing and abundant life.
Thank you, Jack and Willis, for sharing those experiences. I think they kind of show the larger, the deeper reason, getting at the deeper reasonings for why gun violence occurs too. To kind of, we need a whole culture change as well as just legislation. So thank you for both sharing that. Dion, would you like to share what you're working on to address gun violence? I know there's a lot too.
Okay. But I do want to say, for those that are on here that are addressing gun violence, you have to understand that this is not a sprint. This is a marathon. We are fighting to address gun violence. You have to address the root cause. So we're dealing with trauma, generational trauma. So we got to change the mindset. So now we might not see what we plant, but we have to continue to keep planting seeds in community and don't leave. We got to water those seeds and watch them nurture and give them the tools to be able to transform to be thriving. So I just wanted to get that out there for people that always say, because I get this, Dion, you be around the country, what program work? This, and that. All the programs look the same. But what I said last night is we're getting to a moment where people are taking the framework from the feds and bringing it to communities, and they're not seeing results because they're copying and pasting. You can copy, but when you in that community, you know what that community needs. So you can copy a little bit, but you got to put your touch, because every community is different. Every need is different, and people have to understand that what works down the street in Columbus might doesn't work here in Dayton. Different, and people have to understand that, and that's what I've been trying to show people. You know, we got the preventative and intervention. So my thing with prevention to me, how I fight is from 1st to 4th grade. Anything after that, we're in intervention. These kids have social media, they've been exposed. So now we're in an intervention stage, even though it still are intertwines, but you know, it's the prevention, intervention. We're at an intervention stage where we have to start being a little bit more active with them because they're seeing, you know, as we was kids growing up, we wasn't seeing wars on television, seeing bodies, you know, they're being exposed to this type of stuff. So giving them avenues and spaces to be able to speak the vulnerability and to let it out instead of holding it in is what's been dangerous. So what I do is, you know, I do support groups. I have summer camps that is about to start here in a couple of weeks. I work in the juveniles. I speak in schools across the country on violence because I was one of those young men. You know, I've been to where they've been at. You know, and the reason why I stay in those communities, like one person said to me, you know why they made sidewalks for streets? Because everybody ain't meant to walk in the street. Some of the kids that I deal with, some of y'all couldn't be in that room with them without the patience. They're going to test you to the limits. And so, you know, being there to let them see that I've been to where you've been at, but my past doesn't determine my future. Also showing that, hey, there's a will, there's a way, and not just coming in and leaving and disappearing. So just fostering that sustainability programs. I always say the programs don't change the life. They just they walk you through the door. It's what you do after. It's creating that relationship. All my kids I mess with, I'm at graduations. Oh, I'm hungry. You know, just being in their life and 30, 40 years later, guess what? They're gonna always remember that. So, you know, giving them the things that they never had and just being, you know, graduations where they don't think that it doesn't mean nothing. But I'm there. You know, so those little things, giving them those tools and things, because, you know, one of the things I always ask my kids when I'm speaking to them, I always ask the question, who was raised in a two-family household? You'd be surprised how a lot of hands that don't go up. Who was raised in a single hand? My hand goes up. But when I work with them more intimately, I make them write their own eulogy. What can you say about yourself? Because if you have a hard time speaking on what you're going to say, it's time to sit back and realize who you are as a person. But now, how do we work on that? So with our youth, we have to. They don't think; they just react. So my camps is I'm challenging their brains. I need you to think before you react. Because I tell my kids, I hate to say this because it's reality. Some of y'all going to end up in jail and prison. It's reality. But y'all do have a choice for that outcome. And, you know, I'd rather you be in prison where your mom and dad can come and visit you behind the glass instead of coming to your tombstone and laying a flower. You know, we can't sugarcoat these conversations to these kids because they know what it is. And if you're not giving it to them, they're not listening to you. So I have to give them what I got and continue to keep pouring them. And they call me every day. Like they're my kids. They're nothing but big babies. So, you know, just continue to give them, you know, creating a community center here in Dayton, you know, just to give to a community that's going to thrive, from my social services, the mentorship, partnering with unions to give skills to help them thrive. And, you know, and I want that for them and then I leave. It's not for me, it's for them. And just doing what I can, man, just showing up. That's what it is, just showing up and being intentional to help, because a lot of the things that I went through without no guidance or help, a lot of people are going through that. When I fly to these mass shootings that you've seen from television, Nashville, New Orleans, Buffalo, they don't know what's next, especially if it's in the Black and brown community. Because, you know, they always say Asian, Black on Black gun violence, but you don't hear Asian on Asian, white on white. We are clickbait, but you don't come back 6 months to a year later to see how it impacted that community and what resources are still there. Because when these things happen, these centers come, like the Nova. I work with the feds in Nova on these mass shootings, and when the next one comes, they leave. So it's like, you're telling me I got 5 days to process my trauma, and then you go to the next. So now they're going there, and now they're thinking they're all right. But now Nova left, so now they're having a regular day, and then they break down. See, people don't understand is, yeah, that shooting happened in 2019, but my trauma might not resonate till next year. Are those resources still going to be available? Because what they don't understand, as we address the root causes of gun violence, People like me that been through that, if I don't get the help, I'll be the next person in front of that judge as a criminal, because I'm substituting my coping behaviors with drugs, alcohol, crime, and all of that. So it's a cycle that we have to address in whole. There's no one piece, and you might not see it flourish then. Like you said, Dr. Duck, you know, that's my word, flourish. You might not see it flourish then, but you have to trust the process and trust in God that you planted that seed. And one thing for all of us on this call that I say every time, let's take the one words out of these youth's mouth. We didn't have people that was pouring into us. That's a lie. We here, we born. You know, I didn't have a lot of positive people in my community growing up, the older generation. We had one or two here and there. But man, there's so many great people doing the work that we're trying. We ain't trying, we're doing. And that's what we got to eliminate, that word. They can never say that there was nobody in the community pouring in, because I know plenty of them that's pouring in. And I'm gonna leave that topic right there because I got off topic.
Thank you, Dion. Yeah, that is really important. And the support you give families is incredible, and communities afterwards not even a topic of conversation after a mass shooting usually. So thank you for the work you're doing. Jen, what have you been working on to address gun violence?
Wow. It's hard to follow y'all.
I'll switch
I-
to the next question, I promise.
I'm glad I'm last year though. But so one of the things that I think it probably makes sense as being a part of a faith community is that both the Sisters of the Precious Blood, Nuns Against Gun Violence, Ohio Sisters Justice Networks, we provide a lot of prayer services and prayer resources. That's something that we feel that it changes people, and we feel like it affects God. So so we try to do those throughout the year, especially, you know, coming up in June, which is Gun Violence Awareness Month. We'll do some things through all those organizations about the wearing orange. And so we'll do stuff around that. So prayer is like one of the basic things that we do: prayer, advocacy, and education. Again, that's something that I think resonates with a lot of folks doing advocacy work. As Mackenzie said, you know, we did the billboard campaign, which is, again, just trying to get some change of culture about how we think about guns and how we think about the safety of guns and common sense. I did want to I wanted to share that I met Dion when he didn't even know I met him. I met him at the anniversary of the 5-year anniversary of the Oregon shooting, and got to kind of get to know him a little bit. And I knew the sisters wanted to do something, you know. That was the whole chant Willis was talking about: do something. And we don't know what to do. What is ours to do as a congregation of women religious? And I think part of that is to organize things, put some things together. So I reached out with Dion and the mayor of Dayton and the chief of police of Dayton, and we started planning, and mostly, to be honest, it was Dion and myself, are planning this event called Braver Together, which is building resilience against violence through empowered residents. And this is a community building day. This is something that's kind of modeled after stuff that Dion already does, going into communities, getting neighbors to know each other, right? Putting resources out there, encouraging people to go to the resources. Dion has been a great partner in this, actually kind of lead, I would say, but a partner in this, getting, like you said, these victim supports. But we're going to have tables. It's going to be from like 11 in the morning till 3. We're going to feed folks, because I know I have kids, you know, get kids out to feed them, get them some lunch, then their parents may come out or their grandparents may come out. We're going to have entertainment. And then we're going to have these different resource tables, and we're going to invite people to go to each table, and then we're going to have a raffle. So we're going to really encourage them. And a good portion of these tables are victim support. As Dion says, that's really, he does a lot of stuff, not negating your legislative stuff, but in my heart, your power is your work at the communities. You know people in the communities. You're respected in communities. And in Dayton, a month ago, Dayton Daily News did a whole feature on gun violence in the city of Dayton. And it's the communities Dion works in. And so I know Dion has the credentials in there to bring people out. And so we're going to have the tables about not only victim support, prevention and education, which is really important, and intervention. We're also working with Moms Demand Action. Many of you know Moms Demand Action. They do great work, and they'll be bringing gun locks to that as well. And it's complicated. I mean, we're talking about, we've invited the mayor, and some people feel like he isn't doing enough for gun violence intervention in the city of Dayton. Some will say they're concerned about how the police respond to gun violence in western part of Dayton when gun violence happens. But we're adding to get everyone to the same place at the same time to have honest relationship building. We want people to get to know each other, to talk to each other. And that way we can come together and make some change. Also, we want to bring voter registration forms. We need people there to vote. They need to be registered. They need to vote, because that's how we can make a difference in our legislation. I know Senator Blackshear is doing all kinds of stuff. He has put together things in when he was a representative. Great, supported great legislation, and it doesn't go anywhere. We get more voters that say this is important to us. We want to vote for these gun violence prevention things, legislation. Then we can make a difference. So it's so many things that we need to work on, and this is just one event. And what Dia is that we do need to realize. We have to show up next year and the next year and the next year. And I don't know what's going to come from all this. I want to do something. I want to make that next step. And so that's kind of what we're doing here. That's something I'm really passionate about right now. And I'm really nervous about it. I don't know how it's going to go. I mean, I'm ordering hot dogs for 150 people. Hopefully get 100. I might have lagged there.
I am seeing some things in the chat too. I know Councilman from Cincinnati's in the chat, and is mentioning the good work that we're trying to do in Cincinnati here. Deanne, did you have something to add to that? What Jen shared?
I tell Sister Jen, quit worrying about it. Whatever God brings, God brings. Listen, when you do things from the heart, you can never go wrong. I tell people that all the time. You just saying what to do, just show up. As Blackshear said, Senator Blackshear, as they did the council, and that's some of the things that I've seen different here in Ohio. Ohio's my biggest challenge when it comes to fighting. I'm so very strong out of Ohio, and it's sad, but I understand what our state is too as well. But when they did do the gun violence prevention, the gun violence thing at the State House, to pull drive, there needs to be survivors to push drive action. Big policy, but it's those stories that engage people to want to do something. And when she was the representative at the time, we had a conversation about that, and she understood. But it's when I see it from around the country, from my other advocates that I fight with, I see their council members, I see their senators, I see their representatives stand with them, stand behind them. We don't see that much here. I don't. Actually, none of them, because I know all the strong advocates here in Ohio. I don't really see them. The Cincinnati mayor, he's very great standing in place, and Mayor Ginther, I do like him. But we don't see it too often for some reason in Ohio, and we have to come together. And I mean, like with Senator and them at the Western, for instance, if I come there and they show that they're behind, not only that, it starts a wildfire when everybody else starts to get on. So now we got people buying in, and it's becoming bigger and bigger. But it'd be the simple things. And, like I said, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. So we learn as we go, right?
You, Dan, for adding that. Yeah. I think that's super important to remember that it is slow, but it is, I think, a steady and continuous stream, and starting to make those small steps and building relationships and working together. And I know just because of time, I'm going to give some folks time for Q&A. I'll kind of combine the next two questions, I guess, and you can kind of the speakers can kind of take their pick of what part you want to answer. But you know, I mentioned some challenges. I know we've been talking about some challenges in Ohio a little bit throughout this, but and I think kind of interspersed in your answers too, you showed what hope is happening in Ohio. Or what hope do you see? And Deanne kind of just gave that a little bit of hope, us a little bit of hope in how we're trying to keep moving forward, even amidst the challenges that we're facing. But then also, I think something else too is Nuns Against Gun Violence. We are really trying to focus on intersectionality and talking about how, you know, gun violence intersects with a lot of the other issues that we're seeing in our greater society here. And I know a couple months ago or a month ago or maybe or two, we sponsored a webinar where we talked about how gun violence, how we kind of have lost the narrative for gun violence prevention to like the gun lobby, who have kind of really steamrolled us into this uh, gun rights over human life kind of situation that we're in. And so, how do you see gun violence ending as part of the greater struggle for civil and human rights? And how can we kind of re-engage that narrative or start to formulate an alternative that can kind of counter what the dominant narrative often is in terms of gun buying guns and all of that, and owning guns. Dion, do you want to take that really long?
I'll stop Senator Blackshear from going first here. No, but you know, one thing about me is I speak the truth, and let's be honest, we're never going to get rid of them, right? I mean, let's just be honest, because we're in a fight. We gotta think with a clear mind. But how can we be safe with living with it? I mean, this state right here, I always say we follow everything and anything Texas and Florida does. You know, I don't know who's the big brother and big sister. We follow everything they do, but yeah, I just don't see that we ever getting all we can keep doing is showing up and fighting. You know, I tell people our biggest asset in our toolbox is our voice, our voice, our voice, our voice, our voice. Like continue to use it. If you're in a small room, big room, speak what's on your mind, because somebody's listening. And if that person aligns with you, it's going to bring connections and it's going to start opening more doors to generate bigger movement, bigger crowd. Numbers create action, but it has to be the right movement with no incentives or things like that. You know, one thing I've learned in this fight as well, just from across the country, where there's a lot of systemic parts, and I want to break this down because I think people don't understand this. From the mass shooting that I was in to community gun violence, there's a separation that is caused through that. And y'all might not know this if y'all not in the separation, but community gun violence, they get upset because they don't get the resources as the mass violence incidents, right? So now it starts to bring what makes your loved one different than mine. But also we go to a systemic part. One thing I don't hold nothing back. You know, gun violence has been plaguing the Black community, but until it start reaching communities that they didn't think, now they want to do something. So when I'm in DC, yes, I hate that assault weapon. Yes, I can tell you what it done. I can tell you that. But I'm not there fighting that. I'm there fighting gun violence that's happening in communities every day. I'm trying to fight that. Yes, I speak on that. But if you pay attention, and that when DC, I see when it's the mass violence speaking on the Hill, there's not a lot of me's. And it starts to cause a separation. So we have to understand, I mean, just as the crack epidemic, when that happened in the Black community, we didn't do nothing. They was getting locked up. But then when it started becoming an opioid, now we have 7 million recovery homes. So you have to pay attention to the fight beneath the surface as well. So, you know, just showing up and speaking, and that's what I do. I speak for communities that are not being represented, but also being a voice at the table to make sure that if when I'm at the table and policies being made, when I sit at those tables, that it's culturally appropriate. It's deemed, because there's a lot of people writing policies for communities that look like us, but ain't never stepped foot in it. You know, so if you a representative or a senator that lives in the country, yeah, be done, because that's what you're prone on. You know that, but in the community, in the urban community, is having problems. But you want to keep loosening the rein. You know, we haven't took no steps forward. We have just took steps back, but we can't give up, and we got to just keep fighting and just create allies and just keep building and building. Somebody's going to have the courage, and it might be me, and it might be Senator Blackshear, it might be one of us on this call, but we're going to have the courage, because I don't care about losing a friend, a handshake. All I'm caring about is saving lives. The job that God has gave me. So I don't care about losing friends. I'm employed by the best employer, and with him in my corner, I can never go wrong. So, you know, just continue to just keep showing up and being present and being intentional. I'm gonna shut up right there.
I'll give- Amen.
Thank you, Deanne. Yeah, that is really important. We have to connect gun violence to the larger history of violence in America, and the realities of racial injustice and how the threads kind of continue to today. And it really, really sucks. Yeah, yeah.
I forget, and I do want to say I do hold accountability. So I do have a lawsuit against the gun manufacturing company. So in my shooting, my shooter used a 100-round drum that caused all that mayhem in 32 seconds. It took me 3 years to find attorneys that wasn't scared to go against those 3 letters to create this fight. And we won in the Supreme Court. For those that don't know what PLACA is, PLACA protects the gun industry, but we won in the Supreme Court. Now we have a court date in Las Vegas, Nevada, but also when we won the Supreme Court, we get to bring the mother company, North Korea, over. So like Senator Blackshear said, I go against common sense. I understand that 100-round drum, I would like that night to be 0 fatalities, but without that, it might only been 1 or 2. So, you know, we want 0, but we know that when I was on that street hearing that, I kept hearing the police having to reload while he was just playing Call of Duty. And so I just wanted to make that out there, just let y'all know.
Yeah, that is another important point as well, that the corporations are kind of exempt from another challenge, kind of protected by law when they likely shouldn't be. So thank you for that context. Jack, do you want to add anything to what Deanne said and what the
It's
questions
not
are?
lost on me that this forum is sponsored by Christians, Roman Catholic Christians, yet inclusive to others. That makes me think about the totality, if you will, of Christian membership in our country. And I believe if Christians decided tomorrow that we were going to be ridding ourselves of gun violence, it would happen. But the fact of the matter is, so many people who identify as Christians, many of them are indifferent on this question, or many of them are on the side of the gun lobby and protect what they call their rights to bear arms. And yet there is the rest of us, all of us on this Zoom and people beyond us. We have voices. We are driven by vision of a future with less and less gun violence and marked more by love and peacemaking and nonviolence. I think we have to resist being called progressives and accept a better term, and that's faithful, maybe authentic, if you will, Christians who dare speak love, who dare work for peace, who dare work for justice. And I think we have to find our voices and tell our particular stories. I learned from the anti-death penalty movement I'm a part of the importance of personal storytelling. Each of us has a faith story that has driven us to this moment and propels us throughout this movement to prevent gun violence. I think we have to be evangelists for a safer future, for a more loving future, a more hopeful future, and tell our stories in the public space without apology, sometimes with trembling voices and knees knocking, but to be in the public space telling our story about why this matters to God, why this matters to us, We have to live by a reverse Miranda ruling, where we give up the right to remain silent. Anything we say can and will be used for peacemaking, for nonviolence, to preserve the dignity of every human being, not just in some zip codes, but in every zip code in our state and far beyond it. And I think that's how we start a movement. We are the leaders that the world, that our nation needs in this movement, all of us, titles and no titles, we are the leaders of record for this movement. And we have to speak up and speak out during this time.
Thank you, Jack, for those words. And just a reminder too, for folks, if you want to put your questions you have for the speakers in the chat, we'll kind of do a Q&A after this response. Willis, do you want to add on to that?
Yeah, so much has been said, so I'm gonna try not to be too repetitive, but I look at this issue is multi-layer. First thing I want to touch on is messaging. I think messaging is very important. One of my go-tos is that I say when you think about the First Amendment, right? Freedom of speech. Everybody has freedom of speech, but you can't go into a movie theater or a public space and say, "Hey, there's a fire. Hey, there's this. Hey, there's that." You're inducing panic. I take the same approach with the Second Amendment. Yes, I respect the Second Amendment, but we also have to have responsibility with that as well. So I think when it comes to making a difference, having a change in policy, it's all about making sure that we have the messaging more so playing offense than defense, because what happens is that we let other folks create the narrative about what our mission is. And then that narrative gets instilled in the minds of the community, of the people. So they feel like the things that we're trying to do, which is right, the narrative has been painted that it's wrong. So just making sure that we take control of the narrative, of the messaging, and when it's all said and done, this is common sense. Like this is common sense. And then that goes into my second point. Having those conversations. I like to say going into the lion's den. I remember last General Assembly, I had a piece of gun legislation that a lot of gun owners, a lot of store owners didn't like. And they invited me to a podcast. Actually, it was a radio show. They invited me to a radio show. It was a gun owner radio show. And they were actually shocked that I actually showed up and accepted the invite. My whole thing is I'm not afraid to talk to anybody, especially when it comes to this issue. And we had a good dialogue. They seen where I was coming from, but then also too, there were certain points that they made. I was like, okay, that's understandable, but you have to understand X, Y, and Z. And it was good dialogue, and they even said, I definitely do agree with some of the things you're trying to do. We can possibly be an ally to help you with your mission. And I think it takes having those conversations with some uncommon people to figure out where can we, meet in the middle, have common ground. And listen, I'm talking as a legislator. I understand there are folks who are like, I don't want to meet in the middle. It is what it is. But I also understand, I also do feel like we have to have these conversations because it goes back to my first point, the first layer of messaging, the narratives. And by me going on, that radio show, there was a lot of narratives, there was messaging that was being put out that was far from the truth. And I was there to dispel a lot of that. Because you got to realize everybody gets information from different sources. So what I may see, what I may listen to, that person may not. So they're going based off of what they see and what they hear. But it takes people like us to go into, different territories and different platforms just to talk about, hey, these are the facts. This is why we should be doing X, Y, and Z. Having that conversation. Now, I get it. You're going to have people who would never agree with you. I get that completely. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to, that doesn't mean I'm going to run away from the conversation. That doesn't mean that I'm going to stop advocating for what I believe in just because this group over here doesn't get it. Because I may not be able to get to them, but I may be able to get to their supporters, or me having a conversation with gun store owners. They may not understand a lot of the things, but those who go and purchase those guns may say, you know what, maybe it is best for me to get a lock box. Maybe it is best for me to get trigger locks. You know, I may be able to get to them. So, like Dion said, this is not a race, it's a marathon. And what we're doing is that we're planting the seeds. And I understand when you're advocating, when you're fighting, it gets tiring. It gets overwhelming at times. You see, but that is those moments where we have to dig in deeper and remember our why. We have to remember our why, because there are folks who want us to give up, who want us to give up this fight, who want to continue to try to control the narrative, who want to continue to try to control the messaging. And that's why it's okay to take breaks. It's okay to rest. But we have to keep the main thing, and we have to remember our why. So have to continue to be in control of the messaging, of the narrative, but then also too, we have to have those conversations, because I do believe we do have allies out there who are just waiting for something to do. You know, you never know who will be an ally in this fight. I've been on a couple of police ride-alongs. They want to get home. Police officers want to get home, such as people in the community. They want to get home as well. So finding that common ground, like, okay, everybody wants to get home. We all want to live in safe communities. What are some of the things that we can do together to make sure that it happens for everybody across the board? So just having those conversations and continue to have events like this. This is very important to have events like this.
Can I just have Senator Blackshear say, because the messaging is so true, and when I ask him this, he's gonna be like, Senator Blackshear, like the messaging, issue one, how did the messages go out from earlier in the year to, and you see how everybody in that phone, should I vote? It says this, it says that. So the messaging, he is so correct on that. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Thank you both for saying that. Yeah, the messaging is crucial, and how we can kind of bring others into that as well. Jen, did you want to?
Yeah, it was
bring us home
interesting
with
because
that?
when I was thinking about this too, I was thinking, you know, one of the challenges. I'm gonna turn off my video.
We got the
Okay,
the
maybe that'll be
shaky
better.
internet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so maybe just see my name. Anyway, I thought about that too, is the messaging, is having those relationships, talking with people and telling them when we're working for gun violence prevention, gun violence awareness, we're not going to take your guns away. We're not, that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to do what most Ohioans want, which is have common sense gun laws. And when you have a conversation with someone, just like you were saying, you understand we're on the same page. We all want to be safe. And so I think that is sometimes a challenge, because it's frustrating when you hear that stuff, but it's an opportunity. And once you have a couple of those conversations, that is a way to build hope that there will be some change. And like you said, knowing that this is a marathon and not a sprint, in a weird way, that gives me hope too. I think it's really important to recognize that. One of the things that I looked at as also a double-sided, I don't want to say coin, is that right now in the state of Ohio, gun violence legislation is not a priority. I did a quick Google search earlier this week, and there's 10 firearms legislations been sponsored. And looking at them on the surface, now we never know what it really is beyond the surface, but as I read it, I would say 9 of them are not that would support common sense gun law things. That I don't know. Sometimes once you get deeper into them, that's not necessarily what they do. I do recognize that. But I think that knowing that it's not a huge priority now, and that there are some people that are trying to still make to propose and sponsor good legislation. So keeping track of that, I think, is really, really important. And that's where, you know, I think that as this community evolves and continues, we can support each other. As Senator Blackshear is doing things, you know, he says, hey, we're going to be sponsoring this. Can you let people know to call their senators? Or, you know, or as things are going on, we can continue to support each other in this legislation. It's about, like I said, it's a both and. You need to do the stuff that takes care of people, but also we need to change our legislation. So I see those as challenges and hopes in the same way.
I would say also, just in addition to what I've heard, is the non-negotiable human dignity that we have to uphold in this movement for everybody, for every zip code, not just some. And that this work that we're involving ourselves in um, respects the dignity and worth of everybody. And we want to make everybody flourish, everybody have a chance for abundant living, and preventing gun violence can enable that to happen. I think it's got to be part of our narrative, our messaging.
Yeah, absolutely. Before you go, Dion, just a reminder, if you have if folks have questions for the speakers, feel free to put them in the chat so that way I can answer them or have our speakers answer them. Dion, go ahead.
No, I've been just texting in the chat, you know, just hearing what Senator Blackshear said, like, you know, showing up at that meeting. Like, what people don't understand is it take bipartisanship. We can't see our egos. I ain't gonna say our egos, but we know the egos. Like, you have to put that to the pride. When it's time to have that conversation and make that change for the better of the people, you got to have those conversations. And those are the type of legislators. And I know Senator Blackshear, and I know what he does, so I know that he's having those conversations. You know, and back to the message. Not just was things I was just typing in the notes, like for those that don't understand, when you're having a conversation with certain individuals, don't never say gun control. That'll get the conversation shut down. So I always say common sense, you know, to be able to have that little conversation, whether it goes further than the gun control. So it's all about the messaging. And yeah, I just want to speak on that, on the bipartisanship, because it takes both sides. And sometimes we have to put our egos to the side when it comes to the betterment of the people and see where we can have those conversations. And like Senator Blackshear said, I know what answers, know what questions to say and what not to ask, because he knows that's going to cross my boundaries, and I know not to cross his boundaries. But we can find some common space when it's for the people, because they work for the people. So,
Thank you, Dion.
I think faith can give us that portal.
Yeah.
Common faith.
Yeah, faith could be that common ground. Yeah.
So Dr. Jack, because now this is a question to you, because I do get a lot of churches from across the country that reaches out to me on not being able to connect with the youth. What is your engagement with the youth? What's your engagement looking with the youth? Because a lot of them has been reaching out saying that they're having a hard time for the youth coming into the community. As I told them, sometimes if they don't come to you, you go to them. But also, as we know that, you know, certain churches have different age groups and stuff like that. And most of the churches that I was talking to, I think was New York and Chicago, where the pastor maybe was 80, 90 years old, you wasn't connecting, but they had a young youth minister. Because also a lot of egos is involved in these fights. See, we're forgetting about the ego. That's why we're having these fights, because it's ego from the beginning to the end. I speak the truth because I've been in it and I see it and I hear it. And I just want to know what your engagement looks like with the youth, Jack, Reverend Dr. Jack.
We have several congregations around Ohio who are doing outstanding youth ministry. And I think maybe the heart of it is something I picked up in a commercial recently about a soft drink, I think, where there's the so-called next generation of leaders or of athletes are saying, not only do they have next, they have now. And I think we've got to respect the fact that youth not only have the next generation, but they have the now, what's happening now. They're valid and ready to go right now to share perspectives and ideas. And so if we can respect the fact that youth are prepared in many respects to give leadership, to give service, as well as being poured into by older generations, we can have a multiplicity of resources pouring into youth. and receiving what they have to say to the larger context, we have a better chance, I think, to keep them in, help them be on pathways toward wholeness and toward life.
Thank you, good sir.
Thank you, Deanne. All right. Well, I'm not seeing any questions, but before we head out, I did want Jen to chat about some advocacy options before you all head out tonight.
Yeah, I raised my hand, then I realized I had the camera off, so not helpful. So one of the things we talked about, the intersectionality, one of the things that we are working on with in Ohio is budgets are really
You may be breaking up a bit, Jen. Sorry.
important that are needed to reduce gun violence. So I think sometimes we don't think about money when we think about gun violence prevention, but that's so important, and that's something that we are promoting both at the state level and at the federal level. We're also in the state of Ohio concerned about the gerrymandering and voter rights. We got to get people out to vote. The polls show that citizens in the state of Ohio support common sense gun laws, but we got to get people out to vote. We got to get people to register. We got to get people to vote. We got to make sure that our votes are able to make some difference. And people feel like in gerrymandered districts, why go vote? It doesn't matter. It's not going to make a difference, but it does, even if it's at the city commissioners or at the state level or the federal level, it does make a difference. Nuns Against Gun Violence, again, is supporting the Wear Orange events that happen on June 6th. And then we are in the beginning phases of planning an event in Washington, D.C. called Sisters Speak Out. And that's going to be talking about a lot of issues that are happening right now with this administration that do not uphold the dignity of the individual, that do not care for the poor and the vulnerable. And so that's something, keep a lookout for. It's in the early planning stages. I know several of us here are on that planning team. And we feel like, as Reverend Jack was saying, is that, as people of faith, we have something to say about the way that our government is not serving the people the way we think that should be served. We feel like we should be serving the many, not the few. This last year, one of the organizations we're part of called Network said giving up billionaires for Lent, which basically we want the average person, we want the poor people to be cared for. The billionaires are gonna be fine, but the rest of us are not going to be. I know that again, doing one or two things can make a difference. I want to try to do more, but please, we're going to be sending out, I know I'm kind of stepping on Mackenzie's things. We're going to be sending out a resource after this that has some different opportunities for you to take for advocacy. And it'll also have prayer, and they'll also have education. Our website, the Nuns Against Gun Violence website, is a good website. We just reformatted it, so it's expanding. And I know that our congregations also have websites that we've written articles for our electronic and our hard copy newsletters, and we put all kinds of information on those as well. So we hope that we can give some other resources for y'all out there that once this webinar is done, that you can find ways to plug in and we can all work together.
Thank you, Jen. Yes, very important to look at the connections between various issues. I know in the Ohio, paying attention right now to the state budget, there's a lot of social safety nets that are kind of being threatened I know that Senator Blackshear is probably really working on that a lot, but a lot of social safety nets are being threatened in the Ohio state budget right now, including public education, mental health care, affordable health care in general. So all of those things impact gun violence, because if people can't get the help that they need, it's going to come out in other ways. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Gemma to close us in a very quick prayer, and then I will just thank our speakers and give one last thing before we all head out.
Well, this is a prayer that our many sisters throughout the country will be praying for the end to gun violence. So if you would go to the Nuns Against Gun Violence website, you can also get a copy and pray with us, especially as we enter into the first week of June, in which we really mark the Wear Orange, and it's a common effort, a common movement to end gun violence. And so we just pray for that God may journey with us, may inspire us, may motivate us to never give up, to work with hope in our hearts, with joy, and in community, that we will together be stronger and together prevail in ending gun violence. So we ask God's blessing on this work as we go forward from here. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Gemma, for that prayer. Final thank you to everyone who joined us tonight, and to all our amazing speakers. It was a really great conversation, and I look forward to continuing to build those connections and making those relationships happen, so that we can continue to work together towards a just future for where everyone thrives and can live without the fear of gun violence. Just a reminder too is our Nuns Against Gun Violence, we do meet 2 times a month, on the first and third Thursdays at 1 p.m. Feel free to join us with a monthly prayer occurring at the first Thursday meeting at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. That you will receive a follow-up email for all attendees, with a link to recording, more information on our speakers and sponsors, and resources for the Wear Orange weekend, June 6th, and probably local events happening over the weekend. So with all that being said, thank you for your time tonight, for devoting an hour and a half to listening about what's happening in Ohio. And hopefully that gave you some hope to work towards a more just future for all of us, in your state and in your community. And thank you for joining us tonight.